made up of is made up of 25 Southwark residents from a broad range of different backgrounds, and you'll hear from a few of us tonight. We've spent many hours together, both online and in person, over the last 3 months, hearing from a wide panel of experts and debating our recommendations between each other. Our aims for this evening are to help you to understand the jury process and how we arrived at our recommendations, to share some of our recommendations with you, and to discuss how we can all contribute to implementing them in Southwark and beyond. In the first half of this evening's launch event, you'll hear from several jury members about why they got involved, and we'll take you through the jury process from our first session together up to writing our recommendations. You'll then hear a bit about the recommendations themselves, followed by a short break, after which we'll split into groups themed around some of the main topics of our recommendations in order to discuss them in more detail. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. Please could you make sure that you're on mute for the first half of the meeting during the presentations. Also, I should mention that the first half of the meeting is being recorded. If you'd rather not appear in it, please feel free to turn your camera off until after the break. The discussion groups in the second half are not being recorded. Next week, we have the public launch event, which we'll give you more details about at the end of this evening. And we encourage you to make contacts through your networks to join us at that event, and more details about that later. The first person that I'm going to hand over to is Councillor Kieran Williams, the leader of Southwark Council, to talk about why Southwark Council set up the jury process. So, Councillor, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. And I'm delighted that so many of you have been able to join us this evening for this important launch of an important report. And I'll come back to this later, but I particularly want to say a huge thank you to all the members of the jury who have worked so hard to bring together these recommendations. So the question I've been asked to answer is, why did the council commission this report and ask for this jury to be formed and to work through the recommendations? And I think many of you will have seen over the course of this week the latest report from the IPCC on the impact of the climate emergency on our planet. And once again, it's a report that is a stark and very worrying read. And whether it's the even faster than thought disappearing of the Greenland ice sheet or our coral reefs, it is a report that sets out change happening at a scary pace around the world, and therefore the urgency of us taking action. And it also is clear that the impact of that change falls disproportionately on the most vulnerable in our world. 40% of the world's population who are most vulnerable having the biggest impact from the climate emergency. So for me, for the world and for Southwark, taking action to reduce our carbon emissions and tackle the climate emergency is fundamentally important, and it's something we put at the heart of our plans as a council for Southwark, and I know many partner organisations in our borough are doing the same, as are residents across Southwark. Now, there are some things that we have made real progress on, and I could talk about the council. We've halved our own emissions as a council, halved the carbon footprint of our pension fund, started rolling out heat pumps to serve thousands of our council homes, and lots of work on transport, on introducing school streets, cycle hangers, making our borough much easier to walk and cycle, improving public transport, improvements to our train stations, and much more, and planting many more trees, 10,000 that we've just come to the end of planting in the last couple of years. But of course, there is so much more to do. I want to thank all the organisations in the borough that are already taking fantastic action. That's everything from the community-run organisations like SE24, installing solar panels, through to the biggest organisation in our borough, Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital Trust, doing incredible work on their logistics to reduce the carbon emissions from that, to our businesses led by organisations like Team London Bridge and organisations like Veolia too. But to make the fundamental change we need to make to get our borough down to zero emissions is a huge task that's going to take action by everyone. And for me, it's a task that we also have to do in a way that's fair. We can't do it in a way that the burden of that change falls disproportionately on people in our community who are least able to take that change. And it's also a change that we need to do in a way that delivers real benefits for our community. And there are many that we can deliver whether that be a nicer environment to live in, whether that be the creation of new jobs, whether that be the opportunity to really create places and communities where people can thrive and live healthier lives. And that's why we turned to the jury. Last year, we agreed our climate action plan for Southwark, but we know there is always going to be more to push forward and move even faster with it and deliver that change. And we wanted to hear from a representative group of Southwark residents about what the best ways to do that are. So we put a very open question to the jury of how can we best reduce Southwark's emissions in a way that you think is fair? And that's what they have worked through. And I'm delighted to say that the recommendations are both comprehensive and ambitious for our borough. I'm very glad to say that they set out many of the things that we're already doing in our borough as priorities and we should continue to do, but they clearly set out more we should do as well. And we as a council will be looking in detail at all of them to make sure we can push forward the things that have been recommended from the jury. And I encourage everybody here, whatever your organisation, whether you're a business, a charity, another bit of the public sector, or an individual resident, to think about how you can help deliver the recommendations too. Because importantly, they are recommendations for our whole borough of Southwark and everybody who's here. And they answered that specific question: what needs to change in Southwark to tackle the climate emergency fairly and effectively? And they have done that incredibly well. The challenge is clearly huge. Our own work found that we need nearly £4 billion invested in our borough to deliver the change we need. And of course, that does mean that we will need not just everyone in Southwark to take action, but we'll need a government that backs that action too, and we'll need big businesses that back that action as well. But I just want to finish by saying a range of thank yous. Thank you to everyone who's helped work through this report. That includes the oversight panel members from organisations across Southwark who've helped make sure the process is run well, that the jury is well supported, the commentators who've been in and provided support and evidence, Shared Futures who've run this process, but of course, most importantly, the jury members for giving your time to help us all understand the action we need to take in Southwark. So I'm delighted to hand over to hear more about the detail that's in the report. My thanks to the jurors, and I want to say again that we as a council will absolutely be playing our part in taking forward the recommendations that you've made. And I again encourage everybody else who's on this call this evening to work through the report and think about the role you can play, because making this change, making our borough a zero carbon borough, is fundamental to the future of our whole planet, fundamental to making Southwark a great place for people to live, and can deliver incredible benefits for all of us if we work together to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So one of the first things that we did as a jury was to take on board the question that was set for us by the oversight panel that was just mentioned by Councillor Williams. And it's a question that we kept in mind throughout this process. And I'm going to just repeat it for you so that we're all letting it sink in. What needs to change in Southwark to tackle the emergency of climate change fairly and effectively for people and nature? And one of our final tasks as a jury was to write a statement to go along with our recommendations that would sum up our reaction to what we learned and give people some insight into the thinking behind our recommendations. So before we tell you about the jury process, we thought we'd read you our final statement by way of an introduction. I'm going to hand it over to fellow jury members Tony and Emma to read it to you. So over to you, Tony.
Having gone through the jury process, the opportunity to learn more about the impact of climate change on Southwark and beyond, as well as the many potential solutions. Some of us feel let down and overwhelmed because the gravity of the situation was not made clear to us in the past. We feel worried, angry, and disappointed, and are concerned that we are not acting like this is an emergency. We must have change, we must have a future. We are passionate about being part of Southwark and care about the future of our borough.
There must be a rapid and decisive implementation of the action that's needed. This action must be taken by the council and others. It must be bold, it must be more than gesture, with the council blazing the path and leading by example and propelling the movement to change. The council must look beyond its own immediate power at the same time as bringing all its own departments together with a real sense of holistic purpose. At the same time, we believe legislation must exist to enable the council to take the action needed. Although we recognize that individuals must bear some responsibility, we urge the council to recognize that we're not prepared to bear the brunt of change if we're not given the tools, encouragement, and infrastructure for us to be equipped and empowered to act. Having come together to deliberate and produce recommendations, we expect measures to be put in place to allow the council and others to rapidly come back to the citizens of Southwark to report on progress in implementation of these recommendations with strong, specific commitments. Handing it back to Chris.
Thanks very much, Emma. The first stage of the jury process was to recruit the jury members, and I'm going to pass it over to Pete from Shared Future to explain how this was done.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Hi, everybody. My name is Pete Bryan, and I'm from the not-for-profit organisation Shared Future. And we had the absolute privilege of being able to work with this group of 25 jury members over 30 hours of deliberation before they reached their recommendations and their statement. So we recruited a group of local residents to create, in effect, a mini version of Southwark that reflected the diversity of the local population. So to do that, we used a process called sortition, which meant that we sent 5,000 letters to randomly selected addresses from the Royal Mail address database across the borough. And in that recruitment package, we included a letter, some frequently asked questions table, and a little card that you can see in the picture there, inviting people to express an interest in taking part. And we had 170 people came back to us. And then those names and those details and those demographics that they'd given us when they registered their interest were put into a computer. And then a group of 30 were selected that became our jury members. So that 30 fitted a profile of the local community that reflected its diversity, so that we could say it was a mini version of Southwark. And we chose those 30 in the knowledge that there might be some dropout and we'd end up with a group of roughly about 25. And that profile reflected the local diversity of the population in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of disability, in terms of local geography, in terms of levels of deprivation, so that we had participants from very disadvantaged parts of Southwark, as well as people from more advantaged areas of the borough. And we also recruited based upon attitude to climate change. So we had people that were very concerned, fairly concerned, not very concerned, and not at all concerned about climate change. And as I said at the beginning of this, it was an absolute pleasure to work with them all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening.
Cheers, Pete. We're now going to hear from a few individual jury members about themselves and why they got involved in a citizens' jury. The first person that you're going to hear from is Angel, who couldn't be here tonight, so she's recorded a video statement that you're going to hear now.
Hi, my name is Angel Mba. I'm self-employed and I've lived in Southwark since 2010. I decided to apply for the climate jury program when I received the invitation, because I first saw it as a privilege to be involved in my local community service, and also I was happy that my opinion was needed. Initially, I didn't know what to expect, as I haven't done anything like it before, but from the first meeting we had and seeing the various demography of people that were involved, we were diverse really, yet one voice, I must say. Everyone showed the same passion, although most of us didn't understand the enormousness of the climate change impact as it is. Also, I must commend particularly the facilitators, the way they handled the sessions. They ensured everybody is carried along, and that got me more enthusiastic, really. I had a beautiful and memorable experience, I must say, throughout these sessions. Most importantly, I learned more about the emergency of the climate change, and I also learned more about Southwark as a council. You know, the different resource persons that they invited, they educated us on many things as regards to zero emission agenda, pursuit. Well, moreover, the information we got made it overwhelmingly shocking to some of us as to why government and as well as the local council, I mean Southwark Council, how they kept it cool until recent time. Well, finally, after the program, I can say I am now a more informed person, a better informed person rather than when I joined, and I am very, very optimistic that our voices as members of the jury will be acknowledged by the local council, and we hope that our recommendations will be implemented. Thank you.
And we're now going to hear from fellow jury member Liba.
Good evening. My name is Liba Hoskin. I have been living in Wolvers for 33 years. I'm retired and I'm an active green campaigner. I live next to Aylesbury and not far from Highgate, which gives me a particular understanding of the tragedy, waste and the real cost of demolishing estates on people and environment. Besides large scale of human suffering and huge loss of council homes, areas of open green space and many mature trees are being lost due to these developments, together with biodiversity they support and their capacity to contain floods, sink carbon, and clean up our air. With Southwark's vast regeneration program, the highest carbon reduction would come from stopping all unnecessary demolitions and refurbishing and retrofitting instead, while building anew only when absolutely necessary, never on a green space or to standards lower than zero carbon. Without this, Southwark won't be able to become carbon neutral by 2030, whatever they say, and repeatedly explained by many environmental groups and campaigners. Ever since I first heard that Southwark decided to call the Citizen Climate Jury, I really wish to take part to see that this essential point will be included in the discussion. I was also hoping to learn more, happy to meet similarly minded people, curious how the process might work, and being able to keep the council to account on following the recommendation afterwards. I feel really proud that within such a short time, and also we are all of different backgrounds, with the help of briefings by our commentators, we came to similar views and to a good set of recommendations, which would bring a real change for better if realized. I'm thankful to our facilitators for guiding us through so efficiently. Now it is up to Southwark to get properly serious and start backing their extensive rhetoric by action, especially as this week the latest IPCC report came out reinforcing the fact that a few small changes here and there won't do. The scientific evidence is clear, and any further delay in strongest action by all will cause missing a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. And now to Tony.
I have lived in Southwark for 30 years, starting from Peckham to Elephant and Castle, which is now my home. The reason I took part in Southwark Climate Change Jury was to get a better understanding of what the current climate crisis is within Southwark, how also I add to the problem of climate crisis. I feel that the problem was very insightful and highlighted the current crisis we currently face, but shows how little time we have left to fix it. The process was simple, easy and structured in a way that made it easy to understand the route we were taking to achieve the recommendations to deal with Southwark's climate crisis. Now that the process has ended, I am more aware of the little things that I could do to help the current climate crisis within Southwark. I hope Southwark Council implements all recommendations that the jury have come up with to help fight the current climate crisis. I now hand over to Christy.
Thanks, Tony. Evening, everybody. So my name is Christy. I am a working mum of 2 children, 11 and 13 years old. I'm a fanatic about the natural world. I'm an animal lover, and I also like to think I've been a vegetarian many decades before it became quite cool. When the letter came through the door asking people to register their interest in joining the climate change jury, I jumped at the chance. And when I got the call and was invited to join, I was hugely excited about the opportunity. I've always been hugely passionate about nature and the environment. And after studying environmental science many years ago and ending up following a very different career path, I had been desperate to try and carve out a more practical way to influence change in the world in order to protect our planet. So I hope that by being part of this jury, it is a chance for me and others to try and make a difference. And what better place to start in doing that than in my local community? I've lived in Southwark for about 25 years. And whilst I didn't envisage I would bring my family up in an urban environment, London is a city I feel very passionately about. It's vibrant and diverse, and I think there's no better place to solicit perspectives from people with passion, with commitment, enthusiasm and drive to really do the fair and right thing in response to this climate emergency. We were afforded a great opportunity to participate in this effort. I felt very privileged to work with a diverse bunch of individuals, the jury, who live in Southwark, with facilitators who guided us with passion through the last 3 months, and to also have access to a broad range of experts, change makers and entrepreneurs who, while certainly sharing the quite scary but real narrative around climate change, also gave me hope. There are some amazing people doing some amazing things who should inspire us all to do our bit. One of my favourite pictures is an image of Earth. It was taken in 1972. It was taken 29,000 kilometres from the planet's surface by the crew of the Apollo 17 spacecraft on the way to the moon. And it is often said it's the first full image of Earth. People call it the blue marble. And it really revealed Earth to be precious and fragile and protected only by a wafer-thin atmospheric layer. And it does a really good job of just reinforcing the need for better stewardship of our only home, and it certainly does that for me. So I'm desperate to see some change. The world is an amazing place. We should all show it the respect it deserves and the commitment needed to protect its future for everyone. So despite personally being all in on recognising the fight ahead, I know not everyone is, but I am hopeful that what we do next and how the council and others respond helps educate and rally people to our shared goal. I am concerned about the council's and others' ability to implement these recommendations. Our intention certainly has been to ensure that these are reasonable and relatable, and that everyone can get behind them, and with a real focus on the mental and physical well-being of all of us. But look, it will take some bold and brave decision makers, and I'm hopeful that for all our sakes, we have some of those. So thank you, and I'll hand you back to Chris.
Thanks, Christy. We met as a jury for the first time over Zoom back in November last year, and I'm going to hand you back to Emma to explain our initial jury sessions in a bit more detail. So over to you, Emma.
So I'm just going to take you through the first session, the climate change jury, and our experience with the group. So the first 2 sessions of the climate change were on Zoom. We started the first session on Thursday, 25th of November. In the session, we had the introduction from council and a few oversight panel members. We were explaining what is to happen, and we had the chance to also ask questions. So in this session, we also met other jury members for the first time and learned a little bit more about each other. There were 4 guest speakers from the oversight panel on the night. We had Councillor Helen Dennis, who is Southwark Council Cabinet Member with responsibility for climate change, Jack Skillen from Team London Bridge, Karen Janelli from Fossil Fuels Southwark, and Sonia Pepper representing the Faith community. It was really interesting to listen to their presentations, and after we had the opportunity to ask them questions to gain better understanding of the jury process and its end goal. In the second part of the session, we were then put in small groups to discuss the best way of working together and how to make the session work for all of us. So to get us thinking about Southwark, we each shared 3 words to describe the area we live in. It was then made into a word cloud. As a group, we had a chance to look at the map of Southwark and share some initial reflection about what helps and what does not help with the climate change in local areas. Personally, I was very nervous in the first session. I didn't speak. It was very intimidating meeting everyone on Zoom. So for me, it was harder to break the ice and make connections. I felt that everyone was on the same boat. We were also quiet in the first session. At one point, I wondered how the jury can be productive in this process. Then the following Thursday, we had the second session, which is also on Zoom. In this session, we learned about what climate change is and what impact and could be in the future, and found out where the carbon emission come from in Southwark. We heard from 3 commentators in the session, Jonathan Haig, Catherine Brown, and Matt Babick. After their presentation, we were put into a small group and had the opportunity to do a question and answer session with each of the commentators. It was a very educational session where I learned a lot about climate change. I was particularly shocked to learn the catastrophic effect of the climate change on the future. I felt that compared to the first session, the jury member came together better as a team, and in the second session, we begin to know each other better and begin to ask the right questions. I really enjoyed the presentation for all the commentators. It has given me a lot to think about. So that's from me, and handing back to Chris now.
Cheers, Emma. And after 2 weeks of staring at each other on screen, we finally got to meet in person for the third session, where we would decide on our focus for the remaining part of the process. And Tony's going to tell you a bit more about this.
After the first 2 sessions on Zoom, we were able to meet in person for a full day on September the 4th of December. We were able to consider the information we had heard so far and put together with our own experiences to think through the problems in more detail. We did a problem tree activity to dig deeper into the root causes of climate change, and we spent some time thinking in different ways. We created models and drawings to demonstrate and explore our thinking. In the afternoon, we moved on to thinking about how things happened. We heard some thoughts from a youth climate activist and spent time in small groups, thinking about the areas we wanted to focus most for the jury process. We had a list of 10 potential themes. We narrowed down the list to 3: housing and buildings, transport and business. And I hand back to Chris.
Thanks, Tony. We heard from over 20 different expert commentators during the jury process who helped explain and discuss a wide range of issues with us. You can see them on screen now. I'm going to hand over to Christy to speak some more about them.
Okay, thank you. So look, I think you've heard a little bit about this, but very, very privileged to hear from such a diverse and well-informed group of commentators, very passionate and knowledgeable about their topics. They were all identified jointly by the Oversight Panel and Shared Future to address the chosen topics that Tony just called out. And they had a wide range of experience and information to bring to the table. They were briefed in advance and asked to use clear and simple language for their presentations. We had an option to red card them if they used jargon or presented things in a way that was difficult for us to understand. We actually videoed all the presentations. They're all accessible for everyone to watch on the Southwark Council website. And after hearing the commentator presentations, the jury members had a chance to reflect. We worked in small groups. with a facilitator and had an opportunity to think about questions to pose back to the commentators. In some sessions, we did that as a broader group, question and answer. In other sessions, we broke into smaller groups with a commentator and had a chance to question, discuss things of interest, probe, clarify things, and so on. I'll hand back to Chris.
Thanks. So the final part of the process was to collaborate on writing up and refining a final set of recommendations. To explain how we did this, I'll pass over to fellow jury member Ben.
Hi, everyone. So the process of brainstorming, drafting and writing our recommendations began during the 3 commentator sessions. After hearing from the commentators, at the end of each session, we moved to breakout groups and were asked to throw around some ideas of possible recommendations, no matter how big or small. And at this point, we were encouraged to think outside the box and be creative. All of our ideas at this point were noted down by the facilitators. Then on the second full day session, all of these initial ideas were written up on loads and loads of little pieces of card and grouped onto 4 tables across the room, corresponding to housing, transport, business, and other category. This other category came about from suggestions that came up during our discussions, which were outside of the main topic areas, and we did not have commentator input on these. We began this day session with a round of speed dating. It was quite fun. In pairs, we each had 1 minute to talk about which recommendation areas we feel was our priority. After the 2 minutes, the pairs switched, one person stayed where they are and another person moved to another table. We repeated this process 7 or 8 times. This gave us a chance to express what was important to us and hear from others too. We then had the first of 3 drafting groups. We picked one of the 4 tables, housing, transport, business, and other, and could move around to these different tables throughout the day. With all of the pieces of card across the table, we took a few minutes to absorb them all, and then collectively started grouping into themes that form the basis of what would become our recommendations. With one person being the scribe, this was a point in which the initial wording of our recommendations began to take shape on big pieces of flip chart paper that we then stuck up on the wall. After the 3 drafting sessions, we had a lot of recommendations up on the wall, on all of the different walls of the room. We then had time to sort of collectively as a group review all of the recommendations together, give some feedback, and had a chance to raise some further specific questions. These recommendations were then typed up by the facilitators, sent to the oversight panel and commentators to answer any of the questions that we had, to give comments on things that we might want to consider potential additions to make the recommendations more robust. In our final evening session, we then had the time to discuss the comments from the oversight panel and commentators and make some final edits. I have to say this led to some spicy debates as we decided whether or not to incorporate the various comments and suggestions into our final recommendations. But after this session, that was when our recommendations were finalized. So that was the process. That's how we came up with our recommendations. I'll hand back now to Chris.
Thanks, Ben. And that just leaves the recommendations themselves. We made a set of 20 recommendations in total across the 4 topics that we focused on. I'm going to hand over to Jenny from Shared Future to talk about how the recommendations were voted on and to summarise the recommendations that had the highest level of support from the jury. So over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Chris. So as Ben described, after session 10 of the jury, the recommendations were finalised. So we compiled those into a voting booklet, and jury members were given an opportunity to go through each recommendation one by one and to indicate their level of support. So it went from strongly support, support, neither support nor oppose, oppose, or strongly oppose. And they ticked whichever box they felt about each recommendation. And then they were given a chance to write a couple of sentences about what their thinking was behind the reason for how they voted on that particular recommendation. And all the details, every comment that people made, and all the exact details about numbers of who voted for what and so on are all in the full report. So you can see all of those comments there, which are really illuminating and give it a good insight into the thinking behind jury members as they went through this voting process. So after we'd collected the voting booklets back from all 25 jury members, we came upon the ranking that you'll see in the report by allocating 2 points for every strongly support vote, 1 point for every support vote, nothing for a neither support or oppose, a -1 for an oppose, and -2 for strongly oppose. And based on those calculations for each vote of each of the 25 members, we came up with a point system, which you'll see referred to in the report, which came up with a ranking. But I think the jury members would be keen for me to stress that although the rankings are useful for you to look at and to get an idea of which ones gained strongest support, even the recommendations that came out lower in the rankings still have a good amount of support from across the jury. So they do want you to see these recommendations as a package. But that said, there were some that came higher up the rankings, and I'll go through the 4 that were at the top now. So there was a joint 3rd place, and the first recommendation of those two, the joint 3rd was one about transparency, accountability, and progress monitoring. So you can see the full wording up there in front of you on the screen, but this was about the jury members saying that the climate emergency needs to be a significant consideration in all council decisions, looking for more transparency and accountability on council activities with clear goals on carbon reduction, climate mitigation, and adaptation in relation to the climate emergency, and communicating these to Southwark residents. A clear emissions pathway you can see there in the 3rd bullet point. And the 4th bullet point was that climate juries to be called no more than 3 years apart to measure progress, sooner if required. And this is about looking at how the recommendations are going in terms of implementation and holding the council to account. So the other recommendation which came in 3rd in the ranking relates to improving energy efficiency of housing. So you can see here at the beginning, it says about incentivising all landlords to improve energy performance certificates ratings from E to B by 2025 by offering discounts on loans or retrofit schemes. There's a pointer there about the fact the jury feels that local or small businesses providing retrofit services should be supported and prioritised for contracts. There's some more things about information in there, and then the bullet points you can see about leading by example in terms of retrofitting owned properties, repurposing unused funds to pay for retrofitting and applying for additional funding opportunities, looking at an education and advisory service to DIY retrofitters, including residential and small businesses in that. There was concern about inspection and enforcement of energy efficiency standards, and also not forgetting non-residential buildings. So those are the 2 that tied in 3rd in the rankings. Then 2nd was a transport recommendation, which you can see here the heading affordable, accessible and appealing public transport. So there are some practical suggestions in here in terms of some about increased numbers of electric buses, and some things about increased frequency. There's some messaging things in there about positive messages to increase uptake of public transport. Again, going back to practical things, Wi-Fi and phone charging in all buses and trains to make it attractive. Safety was something which was talked about quite a lot. So consideration of personal safety as a barrier to wider use of public transport. And the last point you can see in there about improving public transport in parts of the borough which currently maybe have poorer services, but a large number of residents. And then in 1st ranking position is this recommendation focusing on walking. So walking is a free, easy and zero carbon method of transport. And there are these ways that you can see in front of you here that the jury felt that barriers could be removed to walking. So is it improving the quality of pavements, air quality, more walking maps and directions. So there was interest in this being not just in areas which are maybe kind of tourist areas, but just in kind of normal places, so people could see how long it might take to get from the station to a high street or something like that. More easy pedestrian routes and car-free pedestrian zones. And then finally, you can see there that focus on encouraging and enabling more children to walk to school. So that was the one that came 1st in the rankings. And just before I hand back to Chris, I'm going to say to Chris, we're in the unusual position of being slightly ahead of time. So I think we can offer a more generous 10-minute break. So back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so we're about to go into a break, and when we come back in 10 minutes, we're going to split ourselves into groups in order to discuss the jury's recommendations in more detail. There's going to be one group for each of the topics you can see on screen now. That's one group for housing and buildings, one group for transport, one group for business, and one group for other, which covers green spaces and transparency. You'll get a chance to participate in 2 group sessions, so please have a think about which groups you'd like to join during the next 10 minutes. We'll leave this slide up during the break in case you want to have a read through it. So I think the next slide shows the numbers of the rankings in brackets for each recommendation. So please feel free to have a browse through those. And if you want to see the recommendations in more detail, you can have a look at the full report, and they start on page 25. I think we can post a link to that in the chat in case anybody doesn't have a copy of that. But I think other than that, if we can come back around 25 past 8, does that sound all right? Then yeah, feel free to turn your cameras and microphones off during the break, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. I hope everyone's had some productive discussions. Our final speaker tonight is going to be Councillor Helen Dennis, Cabinet Member for the Climate Emergency and Sustainable Development, who's going to outline the Council's next steps in the process. So over to you, Councillor Dennis.
Thank you so much. I think we could have carried on that discussion for quite some time. So thank you to all the jury members for their presentations and through leading us in the breakout groups. It's been a pretty unique experience, what you have all been through, the opportunity to come together with fellow Southwark neighbours to learn about and wrestle with one of the key challenges of our time. And I'm quite jealous and would have loved to have been a juror myself. I tried to watch through the presentations as you've gone along, which are still on the Council's YouTube channel. And I hope that jury members have found it enriching and worthwhile. It was great to hear Angel earlier talk about it being a beautiful and memorable experience. Tony also talking about it being insightful. As Councillor Williams set out at the start of the evening, developing our Southwark-wide response to the climate emergency is a key priority for the Council. And Southwark itself will be vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, to extreme weather events, flooding, overheating, most of our residents living less than 10 metres above sea level. And we're also a global borough and stand shoulder to shoulder with those people around the world, often some of the very poorest, who are likely to be most impacted if we fail to take urgent action. With that in mind, we are taking this report incredibly seriously, and it's been brilliant to see so many departments across the council represented here this evening. I've seen colleagues not just from the climate change team, but from social care commissioning, public health, transport, environment, planning policy, and of course lots of stakeholders beyond the council who've also got the power to make a difference. As a council, we will have choices to make about how we spend diminishing resources, about how we enable shifts in behaviour to make walking great again, for example, about how we deliver on other council priorities, such as meeting pressing housing needs, while also putting the climate emergency front and centre. And this report will help us navigate some of those important choices, and we will be responding to the recommendations in full this July. Our intention is, as much as possible, to align our own climate strategy and action plan with priorities outlined in this report, with an updated plan also published at the same time in July. In terms of ongoing accountability, which was raised by the jury, we will also be producing an annual progress report, and we will continue with our annual conference for Southwark residents. We've already introduced a constitutional amendment, so climate change has to be considered in all of our decision making. We will be providing an initial cabinet response at our meeting next week, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming several members of the jury to that meeting so that we can hear a bit more about your experience of this process. And whilst the publication of the report marks the official end of all your work, it's clear from the breakout groups that from some members there is an energy and enthusiasm to continue contributing, and I'm very keen to look at how we can facilitate this. There's a lot that we're already getting on with as a council, which speaks to the jury's vision. Last week, I announced a further £13.16 million in capital investment that, among other things, will support the decarbonisation of community buildings and schools in Southwark. This work builds on what we're already delivering, for example, installing air source heat pumps, solar panels on our libraries, a groundbreaking £7 million water source heat pump project, which is nearing completion on 3 of our council estates. And on some of the other top recommendations from the jury, we've now implemented 36 school streets to improve air quality and encourage more children to walk and cycle to school. And we continue to work for accessible and improved public transport. Another key recommendation, the Peckham Rise Station revamp will be a great example of this, I think. And we also now have the fully electric 63 bus, and we'll continue to lobby TfL for more. But we know, given the urgency required, that we need to go further and faster. And it's heartening that this report is so resounding in support of this principle, whilst also offering new ideas and at some points challenged the council. At a time when there seems to be pushback in some quarters, this process has shown that there is widespread public support in Southwark for climate action from all corners of our community. Going forward, we want to harness that support and energy, and with partners here this evening, to use our collective resources and power to effect the change we need, to advocate for central government to do more, and to equip others to take action. We cannot do this on our own, and it's only by working together that we will tackle the climate emergency in Southwark. So thank you again for such a great evening and for a really comprehensive report. Thanks.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. And thanks to everyone else for being here this evening. It's been a real privilege both to have been a part of this jury process and to be able to share its recommendations with you this evening. We hope you'll go away from this meeting encouraged to act with a sense of urgency based on our recommendations. As mentioned, there's going to be a public launch next week. It's going to be on Thursday, the 10th of March from 7 till 9 p.m. We'll make sure details are circulated to you all that have attended this evening so you can share it widely amongst your networks. Also, please feel free to get in touch with Tom Sharland at Southwark Council if you've got any further thoughts on how you or your organisation could support the implementation of these recommendations. His email should be in the chat now, I think. And I think that's everything for this evening. So thank you for coming and good night. Cheers.
Thank you very much.